The argument had been going on for 3 hours now, and Rachel Webb was done pretending to care. She sat in her designated chair at the Galactic Council chamber, watching two alien delegates screaming at each other over something so trivial she had already forgotten what started it. The Drenith representative, a creature that looked like a walking tree with too many arms, was waving those arms dramatically while shouting about trade route percentages. Across the circular room, the K-Valine delegate, whose species resembled giant moths with crystalline wings, was clicking and buzzing in response, their translator struggling to keep up with the angry words. Rachel glanced around the massive chamber. 400 species were represented here, each with their own seat, their own expectations, their own problems they wanted humans to solve. The walls were made of some glowing material that shifted colors based on the mood of the room. Right now, everything was a harsh red, reflecting the anger and frustration that had become normal in these meetings. For 200 years, humanity had been part of this galactic community. At first, it had been exciting. Humans were the newcomers, eager to learn, desperate to prove they belonged among the stars. They had worked hard, solved problems, mediated disputes that other species were too proud or too stubborn to handle themselves. Humans became the ones everyone called when things went wrong. A plague on some distant world. Send human doctors. A war breaking out over nothing. Send human negotiators. Technology failing because two species refused to cooperate. Send human engineers to fix it. The galaxy had learned that humans said yes to everything. They were reliable, they were capable, they were always willing to help, even when it cost them lives and resources. And slowly, over decades, that willingness had turned into an expectation. Then the expectation became a demand. Now, sitting in this chamber listening to another pointless argument, Rachel understood the truth. Humanity had become the galaxy's servants, and no one even noticed anymore. The Drenith delegate suddenly turned toward the human section. Ambassador Webb, surely you can see that our position is reasonable. Tell the K-Valine that they must accept our terms. Rachel felt every eye in the chamber turn toward her. This was how it always went. Two sides would argue until they were exhausted, then both would look to the humans to fix everything. She was supposed to stand up now, offer some compromise that made everyone happy, and waste another week of her life solving a problem that neither species cared enough to solve themselves. Instead, she remained seated. The silence stretched out. The K-Valine delegate clicked nervously. Ambassador Webb, will you not mediate this dispute as you have done so many times before? Rachel took a slow breath. She thought about the last mission the Council had voted on just yesterday. They wanted to send human peacekeepers to the Rendell system, a worthless chunk of space that two minor species were fighting over. The mission would cost human lives. It would drain resources from human worlds. And for what? So two species who contributed nothing to galactic civilization could continue their petty war without bothering anyone else. She stood up and the room fell completely silent. When a human stood during council sessions, it usually meant they were about to fix something. Everyone waited. Humanity declines, Rachel said simply. The words hung in the air like something physical. Several delegates made sounds of confusion. The Drenith representative lowered his arms slowly. Declines what exactly? Asked Chancellor Vorn, the Meshan who led the council. His species looked almost human except for their gray skin and complete lack of hair. Everything, Rachel said. We decline to mediate this dispute. We decline the peacekeeping mission to Rendell. We decline all future requests for human intervention in galactic affairs. The chamber erupted. 400 voices started talking at once, some angry, some confused, all of them loud. Rachel waited for the noise to die down. It took several minutes. Chancellor Vorn raised his hand for silence. Ambassador Webb, I do not understand. Is this some kind of negotiating tactic? No, Rachel said calmly. This is humanity withdrawing from galactic civilization. Effective immediately, all human diplomats, soldiers, engineers, medical personnel, and researchers will return to Earth and human colonies. We will no longer participate in council affairs. We will no longer respond to requests for aid. The galaxy must learn to solve its own problems. "You cannot do this," said the K-Valine delegate, their voice rising in pitch. "We have treaties, we have agreements. We have obligations that we have fulfilled far beyond what any treaty required," Rachel replied. "For 2 centuries, humanity has bled for this galaxy. We have died for species who did not bother to learn our names. We have sacrificed our resources, our time, our future, to prop up a galactic civilization that sees us as nothing more than convenient problem solvers." "This is madness," shouted someone from the back of the chamber. "Who will maintain the jump gates? Who will mediate our disputes? Who will respond when disasters strike?" Rachel picked up her data pad and the small bag she had brought with her. "You will, all of you, together, or you will not. Either way, it is no longer humanity's concern." She walked toward the exit. Her staff, 12 other human diplomats who had been sitting quietly throughout the session, stood and followed her. Their footsteps echoed in the shocked silence. "Ambassador Webb," Chancellor Vorn called out, his voice almost pleading, "please, let us discuss this reasonably." Rachel stopped at the doorway and looked back at the chamber. 400 species, thousands of years of combined civilization, all of them staring at her with expressions ranging from anger to disbelief to something that looked like fear. "The discussion is over," she said. "Humanity is going home." Then she walked out, and the galaxy began to fall apart. The news networks went crazy within hours. Broadcast signals from every corner of the galaxy carried the same shocking story. Humanity, the species that had held galactic civilization together for 200 years, had walked away. News anchors from 1,000 different worlds struggled to explain what this meant. Most of them could not find the words. On the Tauran Confederacy's capital world, a border dispute that had been quietly managed by human negotiators for 30 years suddenly had no one to manage it. The Mishala Union, their neighbors, had always been content to let humans handle the complicated details of where one territory ended and another began. Now there were no humans to call. Within 2 days, the Tauran military moved ships into the disputed zone. The Mishala responded by doing the same. On the 3rd day, someone fired the first shot. No one was quite sure who started it, but that did not matter anymore. The war began and it spread fast. Trade stations that orbited neutral worlds started reporting problems. These stations had always been run by human administrators because humans were the only ones every species trusted. They did not play favorites. They did not steal. They simply made sure goods moved from one part of the galaxy to another without trouble. Now those human administrators were packing their belongings and boarding ships back to human space. The alien merchants who remained did not trust each other. Arguments broke out over docking fees, over cargo inspections, over everything. 3 stations reported shooting incidents. 1 station had to be evacuated when its life support systems failed, and no one knew how to fix them properly. On Asheron Prime, a medical emergency turned into a crisis. A new virus was spreading through the population, something their doctors had never seen before. Normally, they would have called for human medical teams. Human doctors had responded to every plague, every outbreak, every medical disaster for 150 years. They had the experience, the knowledge, the equipment. The Asheron government sent 3 urgent requests to Earth. All 3 were ignored. The virus continued spreading, and the Asheron hospitals were overwhelmed within a week. Admiral Patrick Stone stood in the command center of Sanctuary Station, humanity's largest military outpost, watching the withdrawal operation on dozens of screens. Ships were returning from 40 different conflict zones. Human peacekeepers who had been stationed on hostile borders in war-torn systems on worlds that hated each other were all coming home. Some of them looked relieved. Others looked troubled, knowing what their absence would mean. "Sir, the Viren Empire is broadcasting threats." said Commander Willis, a young officer who had spent 3 years keeping peace in the outer territories. They are demanding we return to our posts. Patrick snorted. Let them demand. How are the extraction teams doing? 90% complete. We will have everyone back within the week. There have been some incidents. Local governments trying to prevent our people from leaving. Nothing we could not handle. Good, make sure every human gets home safely. That is the priority. On the screens, Patrick watched footage from across the galaxy. News reports showed riots on a dozen worlds. Economic data scrolled past, showing markets crashing as trade networks fell apart. Diplomatic channels were flooded with messages, all of them saying the same thing. Come back. Please come back. We need you. Patrick had served in the human fleet for 40 years. He had seen humans die protecting alien worlds. He had watched human engineers work themselves to exhaustion maintaining infrastructure for species who barely said thank you. He had attended funerals for soldiers who gave their lives for causes that were not their own. And through it all, he had watched the galaxy take and take and take, never giving anything back except more demands. Sir, Willis said quietly, do you think we are doing the right thing? Patrick looked at the younger man. Do you know how many human soldiers died last year keeping peace in conflicts that had nothing to do with us? I saw the reports, 2,317. And do you know how many times the Council offered to send their own peacekeepers to help us? Willis was silent. 0, Patrick said. Not once in 200 years has any other species volunteered to share the burden. They were happy to let humans do all the dying. So yes, Commander, I think we are doing exactly the right thing. The Galactic Council held emergency sessions every day for a week. Chancellor Vorn tried to maintain order, but it was impossible. Delegates were screaming at each other, blaming everyone except themselves for the crisis. Some species demanded that military force be used to bring humanity back. Others pointed out that humanity had the third largest fleet in the galaxy, and attacking them would be suicide. We must make them see reason, insisted the K-Valine delegate, the same one who had been arguing over trade routes when Rachel Webb walked out. They have seen reason, said Delegate Irna of the Passion People, a species known for their careful thinking. We are the ones who were blind. Look at the data we have compiled. In the past century, humans mediated 89% of all major disputes. They maintained 70% of shared infrastructure. They responded to every disaster, every plague, every crisis. And what did we give them in return? The chamber fell silent. We gave them more work, Irna continued. We gave them contempt. We treated them as servants because they were willing to serve. Now they are gone, and we are realizing that they were not just helpers. They were the foundation that held everything together. Then we must negotiate their return, Chancellor Vorn said. With what? Irna asked. What can we possibly offer them that they cannot provide for themselves? They do not need our markets. They do not need our protection. They do not need us at all. We need them, and that is a very different thing. The Viren Empire, arrogant as always, decided to send a fleet to human space. 20 warships jumped to the border of human territory and broadcast a simple message. Open your borders and return to your duties, or face consequences. The response from the human colony of New Perth was equally simple. You are not welcome here. Turn back, or we will consider your presence an act of war. The Viren fleet commander, certain that humans would not dare fight, moved his ships closer. The human defense platforms powered up their weapons. For 5 tense minutes, both sides waited. Then the Viren commander looked at his tactical display and realized something. The humans were not bluffing. Their weapons were locked on. Their shields were raised, and their fleet, which had seemed small and weak when the Viren were working alongside them, suddenly looked very dangerous now that it was pointed at them. The Viren fleet turned around and jumped away. They reported back to their government that military force would not work. Humanity was serious about this withdrawal, and they had the strength to enforce it. 6 months had passed since humanity closed its borders, and Dr. Amelia Foster was finally doing the work she had dreamed about for years. Her laboratory on New Earth was quiet, filled with the soft hum of equipment and the glow of holographic displays. She was developing a new type of propulsion system, something that could cut travel time between human colonies by half. The breakthrough had come to her 3 weeks ago, and she had been working non-stop ever since. Before the withdrawal, this research would have been impossible. The Council had strict rules about sharing technology. Any advancement made by one species had to be distributed to all species. The idea was noble, but in practice, it meant that humans spent most of their time helping other civilizations upgrade their technology while their own research languished. Amelia had submitted 17 different research proposals over the past decade. All of them were rejected because the Council needed human scientists working on other projects, fixing other problems, helping other species. Now she could finally focus on helping her own people, and the progress was remarkable. Human colonies across dozens of systems were experiencing a similar renaissance. Engineers were designing better habitats. Doctors were developing new treatments. Artists were creating works that would have been impossible when they were constantly being pulled away for galactic emergencies. Humanity, freed from the burden of carrying everyone else, was thriving. The Galactic Council was not thriving. Chancellor Vorn stared at the report in front of him with something close to despair. His staff had spent months compiling data, trying to understand the full scope of what humanity's withdrawal meant. The numbers were worse than anyone had imagined. Human mediators had resolved 89% of all disputes in the past 100 years. Without them, conflict resolution had collapsed. Wars that would have been prevented were now raging across 17 sectors. The death toll was climbing into the millions. Human engineers had maintained 70% of the galaxy's shared infrastructure. Jump gates that connected distant parts of civilized space were starting to fail. Relay stations that allowed faster-than-light communication were operating at reduced capacity or shutting down entirely. The galaxy was literally falling apart at the seams. Human medical teams had responded to every major health crisis for 150 years. Now, when plagues emerged or disasters created mass casualties, worlds were on their own. The death rates were catastrophic. Human merchants had been the backbone of neutral trade. They were trusted by everyone because they had no political agenda except keeping commerce flowing. Now, trade between hostile species had nearly stopped. Economies were collapsing. Shortages of basic goods were causing suffering on hundreds of worlds. "We did not just lose helpers," Vorn said quietly to his advisors. "We lost everything." "There must be something we can offer them," said his chief of staff, a Passion named Tellys. "Some incentive to return." "Such as what?" Vorn asked. "Advanced technology. Their technology is now advancing faster than ours because they are not wasting time helping us anymore. Military protection. They have proven they do not need it. Trade access. Human colonies are completely self-sufficient. We have nothing they want, Tellys, nothing at all." On the human world of Aurora, President Alexandra Hunt addressed a crowd of reporters. The broadcast was being monitored by intelligence services across the galaxy, everyone desperate to understand humanity's intentions. "6 months ago, we made the difficult decision to step back from galactic affairs," President Hunt said. "I want to be clear about why we made this choice. For 2 centuries, humanity gave everything to the Galactic Council. We sent our sons and daughters to die in wars that were not ours. We poured our resources into solving problems we did not create. We worked ourselves to exhaustion maintaining a civilization that treated us as servants rather than partners." She paused, letting her words sink in. "In those 6 months, we have redirected those resources to our own people. Education funding has increased by 40%. Infrastructure projects that were delayed for decades are now complete. Our scientists are making breakthroughs that seemed impossible before. Our quality of life has improved dramatically, and we are finally building the future we always dreamed of. A reporter raised his hand. Madam President, the Council estimates that over 30 million beings have died in conflicts that human peacekeepers would have prevented. Do you feel any responsibility for those deaths? Hunt's expression hardened. I feel sadness for those deaths as I would for any loss of life, but responsibility? No. Those conflicts were started by species who refused to resolve their own disputes. For 200 years, we enabled their dependency. We taught them that they never had to grow up, never had to compromise, never had to do the hard work of maintaining peace. They simply waited for humans to fix everything. That was not sustainable, and it was not healthy. The galaxy is learning a hard lesson right now, but it is a lesson they needed to learn. Back at the council chambers, debates raged about whether to attempt a military solution. The more aggressive species, particularly the Viren Empire, argued that humanity should be forced to return to their duties. But cooler heads were starting to prevail. Ambassador Trell of the Meshan Commonwealth stood before the council and delivered a speech that would be remembered for generations. We are witnessing something that psychologists call learned helplessness, he said. For 2 centuries, we have depended on humans to solve our problems. In doing so, we forgot how to solve them ourselves. We became children, waiting for a parent to fix our mistakes. The humans did not abandon us. They refused to enable our dysfunction any longer. He looked around the chamber at the hundreds of delegates. Some of you want to force them back, but ask yourselves this: even if we could force them, which we cannot, what would we gain? A resentful servant class that hates us. A civilization held together by coercion rather than cooperation. That is not a galaxy worth living in. Then what do you propose? Demanded the Viren representative. I propose we prove we can survive without them, Trell said. I propose we do the work we should have been doing all along. We resolve our own disputes. We maintain our own infrastructure. We respond to our own disasters. And when we have proven that we can stand on our own, perhaps then humanity will consider rejoining us. Not as our servants, but as our equals. The chamber fell silent as delegates absorbed his words. It was the first time anyone had suggested that maybe, just maybe, the problem was not humanity's withdrawal. The problem was that the galaxy had needed them to withdraw in the first place. The hospital on Quillen Prime was built to handle emergencies, but nothing like this. Dr. Saranth moved through corridors packed with dying patients, trying to help where he could, knowing it was not nearly enough. The plague had started in the northern cities 3 weeks ago, and now it was spreading across the entire planet. His people were dying by the thousands every day, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Before, they would have called for human medical teams. Human doctors had dealt with hundreds of plagues across the galaxy. They knew how to contain outbreaks, how to develop treatments quickly, how to coordinate relief efforts across multiple worlds. But the humans were gone, and the Quillen were on their own. Saranth had tried calling other species for help. The Tauren were too busy fighting the Mishala. The Drenith said they would send medical supplies, but the supplies never arrived because their trade networks had collapsed. The Viren refused to help anyone unless they pledged military support for their civil war. Every species was drowning in their own problems, and no one had the capacity to help anyone else. By the end of the month, the plague had killed 8 million Quillen. The survivors would remember this as the time they learned what life was like without humans to save them. 1 year after humanity's withdrawal, Chancellor Vorn barely recognized the galaxy he had once governed. The Galactic Council still met, but now only 200 species attended. 40 species had withdrawn into isolation, copying humanity's example. They sealed their borders and focused on their own survival. No one blamed them. 12 major wars were burning across what used to be peaceful sectors. Some were border disputes that escalated without mediators. Others were old grudges that had been suppressed for generations, only held in check by human peacekeepers who were no longer there. The death toll had passed 70 million and was climbing every day. The economic situation was catastrophic. Galactic trade had dropped by 60%. Unemployment was rising everywhere as businesses collapsed without access to the markets and resources they depended on. Food shortages were common on worlds that had relied on imports. The galaxy's economy, which had seemed so stable when humans maintained it, turned out to be incredibly fragile without them. The Viren Empire, once one of the most powerful civilizations in the galaxy, was tearing itself apart. For 50 years, human mediators had quietly managed the complex political relationships that held the empire together. Different Viren factions hated each other, but they had always channeled their conflicts through peaceful processes that humans facilitated. Now there were no humans to facilitate anything. The factions went to war, and the empire fractured into 6 separate governments, all fighting each other for dominance. Refugee crises overwhelmed border systems as billions of beings fled the violence. Refugee camps stretched across entire moons, filled with people who had lost everything. Aid organizations tried to help, but they were understaffed and overwhelmed. Before, humans had coordinated disaster relief across the galaxy. Now, every species struggled to handle their own problems and had nothing left for anyone else. On Earth, President Alexandra Hunt walked through the gardens outside her office, enjoying a moment of peace. Her security detail kept a respectful distance, giving her space to think. The reports from the galaxy were hard to read. She knew people were suffering. She knew millions had died. But she also knew that humanity had suffered for 200 years trying to hold an ungrateful galaxy together. Some humans argued for mercy. There were protests in several cities, people carrying signs demanding that humanity return to help. They showed pictures of refugee children, of plague victims, of destroyed worlds. Hunt understood their compassion, but she also understood the bigger picture. "Madam President," said her chief advisor, a woman named Diana Ross who had served in the diplomatic corps for 30 years. "The council has sent another delegation. They are requesting a meeting." Who did they send this time? Delegate Irna of the Passion. She is alone, no entourage. She says she just wants to talk. Hunt considered this. The Passion were known for their wisdom and their honesty. If the council had sent Irna, it meant they were finally taking this seriously. Set up a meeting for tomorrow, somewhere private. The next day, Hunt met Irna in a small conference room overlooking the Pacific Ocean. The Passion delegate looked tired. Her gray skin was darker than usual, a sign of stress in her species. She carried no data pads, no prepared speeches, just herself. "Thank you for seeing me," Irna said quietly. "I admit I am curious what you came to say," Hunt replied. "If this is another attempt to guilt us into coming back, you can save your breath." "It is not." Irna sat down slowly, her 4 arms folded in a gesture of humility. "I came to apologize. On behalf of the council, on behalf of my people, on behalf of everyone who took you for granted. We treated you as servants when you were partners. We demanded your help as if it were owed to us when it was a gift. We never appreciated what you gave us until you stopped giving it." Hunt studied the alien diplomat carefully. "That is a nice speech, but apologies do not change anything. The galaxy had 200 years to appreciate what humans contributed. You chose not to." "You are right," Irna said, "and now we are paying the price for our blindness. But I did not come here to ask you to save us. I came to tell you that some of us are finally learning the lesson you set out to teach." "What lesson is that?" "That we cannot depend on anyone else to solve our problems. That we must take responsibility for our own survival. The Passion Commonwealth has established our own mediation academy. We are training our people to resolve conflicts peacefully. It is hard work, and we are not very good at it yet, but we are trying. Other species are doing the same. The Meshan have created disaster relief teams. The Quellan are building their own infrastructure maintenance corps. We are learning to do the things humans always did for us." Hunt felt something shift in her chest. This was the first time any alien government had acknowledged that they needed to change rather than simply demanding humans return. "How is it going?" Irna made a sound that was probably a laugh. "Terribly. We are clumsy and slow and we make mistakes constantly. But we are learning. And some of the younger species, the ones who barely remember the old system, they are adapting faster. They do not have the habits of dependency that we older civilizations carry." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I want you to know that your sacrifice was not in vain. The galaxy is changing, even if it is changing through pain and suffering. And because I want you to know that when humanity decides to rejoin us, if you ever do, it will be a different galaxy than the one you left." The attack came without warning from the darkness beyond known space. The Kalresh Horde, a name that would become synonymous with nightmare, swept into the outer rim systems like a plague of locusts. Their ships were organic, grown rather than built, pulsing with bioluminescent lights that made them look like deep-sea creatures adapted for the void. They did not communicate. They did not negotiate. They simply attacked, overwhelming defenses through sheer numbers and brutal efficiency. The Rendell system fell in 3 days. The Quellan colonies were destroyed in a week. The Horde moved inward toward more populated space, consuming everything in their path. Intelligence reports estimated their fleet at over 10,000 ships, and more were arriving every day through some kind of portal they had opened in dark space. This was exactly the type of crisis that humanity used to handle. When galaxy-wide threats emerged, humans organized the defense. They coordinated fleets from multiple species. They managed supply chains that kept frontline forces equipped. They shared intelligence and developed strategies that played to each species' strengths. The Galactic Defense Network had been designed by human military advisors and maintained by human personnel. Now those humans were gone, and the galaxy faced annihilation without them. Chancellor Vorn stood in the Council's war room, watching tactical displays that showed the Kalresh advance. His military advisors were arguing about response strategies, but nothing they suggested seemed to work. Fleets from different species could not coordinate effectively. Supply ships arrived late or went to the wrong locations. Intelligence was hoarded by individual governments rather than shared. Every species was trying to defend itself, and none of them were succeeding. "We must contact humanity," said the Tauran military commander, a grizzled veteran who had fought beside human peacekeepers many times. "They know how to fight wars like this. They know how to organize a proper defense." "And what makes you think they will help us?" demanded the Virin representative, whose empire was still busy tearing itself apart. "We spurned them. We took them for granted. Why would they risk their lives for a galaxy that treated them as servants?" "Because that is what humans do," the Tauran commander said quietly. "They help, even when it costs them everything." President Hunt received the emergency broadcasts along with everyone else. She watched footage of the Kalresh attacks, saw the destruction they were causing, and felt the weight of command pressing down on her shoulders. In her office, surrounded by advisors and military leaders, she faced the hardest decision of her presidency. "They want us to save them again," said Admiral Stone, his voice heavy with bitterness. "The galaxy is burning and suddenly they remember we exist." "Our intelligence confirms the Kalresh are a genuine extinction-level threat," said General Lin, the head of military strategic planning. "If they are not stopped, they will eventually reach human space. This is our fight too, whether we like it or not." Hunt looked around the room at the faces of her advisors. Some looked angry, others looked torn. All of them were waiting for her to make the call. "What are our options?" "We can send our fleet to join the defense," General Lin said. "Human military doctrine and coordination could turn the tide, but it would cost lives, probably thousands of them, defending species who barely acknowledged our existence when times were good. We can defend our own borders and let the galaxy solve its own problem," said the foreign minister. It is what they deserve after 2 years of ignoring our absence while they suffered. Let them finally face a crisis they cannot ignore. Or, Admiral Stone said slowly, we can allow volunteers. Let individual humans who still care about the galaxy join the fight, not as representatives of humanity, but as people who cannot watch innocent beings die, even if those beings do not deserve our help. Hunt was quiet for a long moment. Then she made her decision. We open volunteer enlistment. Any human who wants to help defend the galaxy can sign up. We provide them with ships, weapons, and support. But we make it absolutely clear, they are not going as official representatives of Earth or the human colonies. They are going as individuals who choose to fight. The galaxy will see it as humanity coming to save them again, the foreign minister warned. Let them think what they want, Hunt said. I am not doing this for the galaxy's gratitude. I am doing this because there are still humans who care about life, even alien life that does not care about them, and I will not stop them from being who they are. The call for volunteers went out across all human worlds. Within 24 hours, 50,000 former soldiers had signed up. Within a week, the number hit 200,000. They were veterans of the old peacekeeping forces, people who had spent years protecting alien worlds. They knew what they were walking into. They knew the galaxy had not earned their help, but they also knew that letting billions die was not something they could live with. Lieutenant Sarah Webb, Rachel's daughter who had followed her mother into military service, stood in the briefing room of the volunteer fleet's flagship. Around her were hundreds of other humans, all of them wearing mismatched uniforms because this was not an official military operation. They were just people who had decided to fight. Listen up, said Commander Harris, a grizzled veteran who had volunteered to lead this force. We are not doing this for medals or glory. We are not doing it because the galaxy deserves our help. We are doing it because it is the right thing to do. We are doing it because humans do not abandon people to genocide, even people who abandoned us first. He brought up tactical displays showing the Calresh advance. The galactic fleets are losing because they cannot work together. They have no coordination, no unified command structure, no supply chain management. We are going to give them that. We are going to show them how to fight as one force instead of 1,000 separate armies. And maybe, just maybe, we can stop this horde before it consumes everything. Sarah looked around at the faces of her fellow volunteers. They were scared. They were angry, but they were also determined. This was what humans did. They helped even when no one asked them to. They fought even when no one thanked them for it. They gave even when nothing came back. The volunteer fleet jumped toward the front lines, and for the first time in 2 years, the galaxy had hope again. Not because humanity had come to save them, but because humanity had shown them what it meant to stand up when standing up was hard. Now the real test would be whether the rest of the galaxy could learn to do the same. The battle for the Mishara Junction lasted 8 days, and it changed everything. When the human volunteers arrived, they found chaos. 16 different species had brought fleets to defend this critical jump point, but no one was in charge. Ships were firing without coordination. Supply vessels could not find the units that needed them. Intelligence about Calresh movements was scattered across a dozen different command networks, and no one was sharing information. Commander Harris took one look at the situation and started giving orders. Within hours, he had established a unified command structure with representatives from every species. He created supply routes that actually worked. He set up intelligence-sharing protocols that got information to the right people at the right times. The transformation was remarkable, and the alien commanders who had been floundering suddenly found themselves fighting as part of a real military force. The Calresh attacked in waves, their organic ships swarming forward like angry insects. But this time, the defenders were ready. Human tactical doctrine spread through the fleet. Instead of each species fighting alone, they fought as coordinated units. The Tauran heavy cruisers provided cover fire while the Mishala fast attack ships struck vulnerable targets. The Passion carriers launched fighters in synchronized waves that overwhelmed Calresh defenses. And through it all, human volunteers moved between the different fleets, advising, coordinating, making sure everyone worked together. On the third day of battle, something unexpected happened. A Drenith supply officer, watching human volunteers organize the logistics network, started copying their methods. She created color-coded supply routes and established checkpoints that made distribution more efficient. Other species noticed and started doing the same. By the fifth day, alien commanders were implementing human tactical suggestions without being asked. They were learning, finally learning, how to fight together. The Calresh broke through the defensive line on the seventh day, and it looked like the battle was lost. Their portal ships were arriving with reinforcements faster than the defenders could destroy them. Commander Harris made a desperate call to Earth, asking for permission to use experimental weapons that human scientists had developed during the isolation years. President Hunt gave authorization, and 3 human volunteer ships deployed gravitational disruptors that collapsed the Calresh portals. Without reinforcements, the Calresh fleet was suddenly vulnerable. The combined galactic forces, fighting with coordination they had learned from humans, pressed the attack. The battle turned into a rout. By the 8th day, the Calresh were retreating, their invasion broken. The cost had been terrible. 20,000 human volunteers died in that battle, along with hundreds of thousands of alien soldiers. But the galaxy had survived, and more importantly, it had learned something crucial. They could work together when they had to. They could coordinate and cooperate and fight as one force. They just needed someone to show them how, and for once, they had actually paid attention to the lesson. 5 years after Rachel Webb walked out of the council chamber, she walked back in. But everything was different now. The chamber had been rebuilt and reorganized. Instead of ranked seating that put some species above others, everyone sat in a circle. There were no privileged positions, no hierarchy of importance. Every voice was equal. Delegate Iona, now Chancellor after Vorn retired in disgrace, stood to greet Rachel. Ambassador Webb, welcome home. Rachel looked around at the faces watching her. Some were familiar. Many were new, younger delegates who had never known the old system of dependency. I am not sure I would call this home, she said carefully, but I am willing to listen to your proposal. The Compact of Equals, Iona said, gesturing to a document displayed on every screen in the chamber. We have spent 3 years drafting it with input from every member species. It restructures galactic governance completely. No species is subordinate to any other. Every species contributes to peacekeeping, disaster relief, and infrastructure maintenance proportionally to their population and resources. Technology sharing is based on fair exchange, not demands. And most importantly, no species will ever again be expected to sacrifice endlessly for the benefit of others. Rachel read through the document carefully. It was impressive, detailed, and actually seemed fair. You wrote this without humans involved. We had to, said Ambassador Trell of the Meshan Commonwealth, who had become one of the strongest voices for reform. If we had asked you to write it, we would have learned nothing. We needed to prove to ourselves and to you that we could create something just and equitable on our own. There are enforcement mechanisms, added a young Passion delegate named Soren. If any species begins to exploit another, sanctions kick in automatically. If any species refuses to fulfill their obligations, they lose voting rights. The galaxy will never again allow one people to carry all the burden. Rachel felt something shift inside her. This was what humanity had fought for, even if they had fought by walking away. I need to consult with my government, she said. This is not a decision I can make alone. We understand, Iona said. Take all the time you need. The offer stands indefinitely. 2 months later, representatives from Earth and all human colonies met on New Earth to vote on whether to rejoin galactic civilization. The debate was fierce. Some argued that humanity should remain isolated, that the galaxy had not suffered enough to truly change. Others pointed out that isolation was never the goal. The goal was respect, and the new compact seemed to offer exactly that. President Hunt made her recommendation. We walked away to teach the galaxy a lesson about dependency and respect. That lesson has been learned at tremendous cost to everyone. Now we have a choice. We can remain isolated out of spite, or we can rejoin as equals and help build something better than what we left behind. I say we walk back to the table, but this time we walk as partners, not servants. The vote was close, but humanity chose to return. Rachel Webb signed the Compact of Equals on behalf of Earth 6 months later, and the galaxy celebrated not because humanity had come to save them again, but because the galaxy had finally grown up enough to be worth saving. Years later, when historians wrote about this period, they called it the Great Lesson. They described how humanity's absence had forced the galaxy to confront its own weakness and dependency. They talked about the millions who died, the suffering that came from learned helplessness, and the painful growth that followed. But they also wrote about what came after, about a galactic civilization that was stronger because every species contributed, about peace that lasted because it was maintained by all, not just by one tired people who bore the burden alone, about a partnership of equals that worked because no one had the luxury of taking anyone else for granted. Rachel Webb, now retired and living on Earth, sometimes watched the news broadcasts from the Council. She saw species working together, sharing responsibilities, solving problems collectively. It was not perfect. There were still arguments and disputes and failures, but it was better, genuinely better than what had been before. She thought about that day 5 years ago when she stood and walked away. It had been the hardest decision of her life, knowing the suffering it would cause. But sometimes the greatest act of compassion was not doing everything for someone. Sometimes it was stepping back and letting them learn to stand on their own, even if they fell a few times first. The galaxy had fallen, but it had gotten back up, and now, finally, it was standing on its own 2 feet.